The silence that followed his words was not empty. It was a dense, heavy thing, a physical presence that settled in the air between us, pressing down on my chest and stealing the breath from my lungs. "I don't need you anymore," just 5 words, spoken with the casual cruelty of a man tossing aside a worn-out coat. My son Darnell, the boy whose entire world I had built with my own 2 hands, stood in the doorway of the home I had maintained for him, a stranger wearing his face. His wife, Keisha, hovered just behind his shoulder, a shadow with a triumphant smirk, her eyes glinting with a cold, proprietary light. She had won. She had finally managed to sever the cord that had bound my son to me for 49 years, a cord I had foolishly believed was spun from love and mutual devotion, but which she had expertly reframed as a chain of control. I was widowed at 23. Feels like a lifetime ago, and in many ways it was. My husband, James, was a good man with a laugh that could fill a room and a heart full of dreams for the future. We had Darnell, our perfect, beautiful boy, and for a brief, shining year, our life felt like a promise of endless sunshine. Then a fever came in the night, swift and merciless, and my world went dark. The doctors used clinical terms, but all I understood was that the man I loved was gone, and I was alone with a 1-year-old child and a future that had fractured into a million terrifying pieces. The grief was a shroud I wore for years, but grief is a luxury a single mother cannot afford to indulge in for long. Darnell needed me. He needed food on the table, a roof over his head, and a world that felt safe, even when mine had been shattered. So I worked. I had always had a talent for delicate things, a patience for intricate work. I sold my own modest wedding jewelry to buy my initial stock, a collection of silver chains and semi-precious stones. By day I stood behind a small counter in a shared market space, my smile practiced and warm as I helped customers choose gifts for their loved ones. All the while my own heart felt like a cold, empty locket. By night, after Darnell was asleep, his small chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of childhood innocence, I would sit at my sewing machine. The hum of the motor was the soundtrack to my solitude. I took in alterations, mended torn seams, and eventually began creating my own simple dress designs. The fabric slipping through my fingers, the precise prick of the needle, the transformation of a flat piece of cloth into something with shape and purpose. It was a form of therapy. Every stitch was a prayer for my son's future. Every dollar earned was a brick in the fortress I was building around him. A fortress meant to protect him from the harshness of a world that had taken his father. Perhaps I protected him too much. Looking back, I can see the threads of my overcompensation woven through the entire tapestry of his life. I never wanted him to feel the sting of lack, the fear of insecurity that was my constant companion. When other boys had to get summer jobs, I insisted Darnell focus on his studies. When he wanted the latest sneakers or a new bicycle, I worked 3 extra nights on a rush order of bridesmaid dresses to make it happen. I was his shield, his provider, his constant, unwavering son. I thought I was giving him the gift of a carefree childhood, the foundation he needed to become a strong, independent man. I see now that I was building a beautiful, comfortable cage, and I had forgotten to teach him how to fly on his own. He grew into a man who was kind, intelligent, and deeply fundamentally dependent on me for everything from balancing his checkbook to making his doctor's appointments. He loved me, I never doubted that, but it was the love of a boy for his mother, not the love of a man for the woman who raised him. Then came Keisha. She was dazzling, ambitious, with a smile that could charm a snake and a mind as sharp as broken glass. When Darnell first brought her home, I wanted to love her. I truly did. She was the woman my son had chosen, and his happiness was the only currency I had ever valued. She said all the right things, praising my home, my cooking, the way I had raised such a wonderful, devoted son. Her compliments were like perfectly wrapped gifts, beautiful on the outside but empty when you opened them. There was always a subtle barb hidden within the praise. "It's amazing how you've managed all this on your own, Loretta. Darnell is so lucky to have had you to lean on for so long." It was a statement that simultaneously acknowledged my sacrifice and framed him as weak, as leaning. She was planting seeds of doubt, and I was too naive, too desperate for my son's happiness, to see the poison in them. The changes in Darnell were gradual at first. He started questioning my advice, little things he had always trusted me on. He'd call to ask about a recipe, and I'd hear Keisha's voice in the background. "Oh honey, just Google it. Your mom's way is so old-fashioned." He stopped dropping by unannounced, his visits becoming scheduled, formal affairs. The easy, comfortable silence we once shared was replaced by a strained politeness, a sense of walking on eggshells. He was a man caught between two powerful gravitational forces, the lifelong pull of his mother and the new intense orbit of his wife. Instead of finding his own center, he allowed himself to be torn. Keisha saw my love not as a gift, but as a threat to her absolute control. She began to mistake my care for interference, my concern for criticism, and slowly, painstakingly, she taught Darnell to see it that way too. The final confrontation, the day he spoke those 5 devastating words, was over something laughably small, a down payment for their first house. For years, I had been setting aside a portion of my earnings, a nest egg I called the Darnell Fund. It was for this exact moment. It was the culmination of thousands of late nights, of sore fingers and tired eyes. It was my final gift, the last brick in the fortress. I presented the bank book to them over a Sunday dinner that was already thick with tension. I saw the genuine flicker of gratitude in Darnell's eyes before Keisha's perfectly manicured hand covered his. "That is so incredibly generous, Loretta," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "But Darnell and I are going to do this on our own. He's a man now. He needs to stand on his own 2 feet. Without his mother's money, the implication was clear. My help was not help, it was a handicap. My love was not support, it was a leash." Darnell, looking at his wife's adoring, expectant face, simply nodded. He parroted her words, his voice lacking conviction but firm in its delivery. "She's right, Mom. We need to do this ourselves." I tried to explain that it wasn't about control, that it was a gift of love, the fruit of my life's work. But my words were lost, drowned out by the narrative Keisha had so carefully constructed. The argument escalated, my hurt and confusion clashing with his rehearsed defensive script. And that's when he said it. He stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor, the sound like a tear in the fabric of our lives. "We don't need your money, and I don't need you telling me how to live my life. I don't need you anymore." He turned and walked out, Keisha gliding behind him, a queen who had finally deposed her predecessor. The silence they left behind was a living entity. It breathed in the scent of the roast cooling on the table and exhaled a profound, soul-crushing loneliness. For 50 years my life had revolved around the son of my son. Every decision, every sacrifice, every joy was measured by its proximity to him. Now that sun had been extinguished, and I was left in the cold, dark void. The first few days were a blur of numb disbelief. The house, once a sanctuary of love and memory, felt like a tomb. Every object whispered of his absence. The worn spot on the armchair where he always sat, the faint pencil marks on the doorframe charting his growth from a toddler to a towering man. The photo albums filled with a smiling boy who seemed like a stranger now. The pain was a physical weight, a stone in my gut that made it hard to eat, hard to sleep, hard to breathe. It was a betrayal so deep it felt elemental, as if the very ground beneath my feet had given way. How could he not see? How could he throw away a lifetime of love for a woman who had known him for less than 2 years? For weeks I floated through my days like a ghost in my own life. I opened my small shop, but the sparkle of the jewelry seemed dull. I sat at my sewing machine, but my fingers felt clumsy and slow. The hum of the motor, once a comforting lullaby, now sounded like a mournful dirge. My neighbor, Martha, a sharp-witted woman who had seen Darnell grow up, would stop by with a casserole or a pot of soup, her eyes full of a knowing pity that I found both comforting and infuriating. "He's a fool, Loretta," she said one afternoon, sitting at my kitchen table while I stared blankly into a cup of cold tea. "He's a grown man with the sense of a child. She's got him wrapped around her little finger, but that kind of knot always comes undone." I wanted to believe her, but the wound was too fresh, too raw. The love I had for my son was so vast it had become my whole identity. Without it I felt like nothing. The turning point was not a dramatic epiphany, but a quiet, creeping realization. It began one evening as I was sorting through a box of old photographs, looking for a picture of my husband, needing to see his kind, steady face. Instead, I found a photograph of myself taken just before I met him. I was 20, standing on a beach, my hair wild in the wind, my face tilted towards the sun with a look of fearless, unadulterated joy. I stared at that girl, a stranger, with my eyes, and I felt a profound sense of loss, not for my husband, not for my son, but for her. For the woman I was before I became a wife, before I became a mother. The woman who had dreams of her own, who loved to paint and dance and read poetry. I had packed her away, piece by piece, over the years, sacrificing her desires on the altar of motherhood. I had done it willingly, gladly, but seeing her face, I understood that in erasing myself for Darnell, I had made it easier for him to erase me too. A cold, hard anger began to replace the suffocating grief. It was not a fiery, destructive rage, but something dense and solid, like a block of ice forming in the center of my being. It was an anger at Keisha for her blatant, cruel manipulation. It was an anger at Darnell for his weakness, for his willingness to be led, for his casual discard of my life's devotion. But most of all, it was an anger at myself, for being so blind, for allowing my identity to be so completely consumed by another person, even my own son. Martha was right. The knot would come undone. But I realized I could not simply wait for that to happen. I could not put my life on hold, waiting for my son to come to his senses. I had to start living for myself. For the first time in 50 years, I had to put Loretta first. My plan, if you could call it that, was not one of revenge. It was a plan of reclamation. The first step was the house. It was too big, too full of ghosts. Every room held a memory that now felt tainted, painful. It was a monument to a life that was over. I called a real estate agent, a brisk, efficient woman who saw rooms in square footage, not memories and heartaches. The decision felt both terrifying and liberating. This house was the fortress I had built for Darnell. Selling it felt like dismantling the very core of my identity as his protector. But it was also the first time I had made a major life decision that was entirely about my own needs, my own future. Of course, the news reached Darnell. My son, who hadn't called me in 3 months, called the day the for sale sign went up on the lawn. His voice was a mixture of panic and accusation. "Mom, what are you doing? You're selling the house?" "Our house." The word "our" struck me. It had not been our house when he walked out of it. "It's my house, Darnell," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. The ice in my core was holding me steady. "And I've decided to sell it. It's too much for me to keep up on my own." I could hear Keisha whispering in the background, her voice a venomous hiss. "Ask her where she's going. Ask her what she's doing with the money." Darnell's voice came back on the line, strained and uncertain. "But where will you go? What about all my things? My childhood room?" He sounded like a lost little boy, and for a heart-stopping moment, the old instincts flared up, the overwhelming urge to soothe him, to reassure him, to fix everything. But I held my ground. "Your things are in boxes in the garage, Darnell. You can come and pick them up whenever you like," I said, my tone even and firm. "As for where I'm going, I'm looking at a lovely little condominium downtown. Closer to the shops and the library." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. He could not comprehend it. In his mind, I was a permanent fixture, the ancestral home, the place he could always return to, unchanging and ever waiting. The idea that I would have a life, a future, that didn't revolve around him was a concept so alien he couldn't process it. The call ended awkwardly, with his mumbled confusion and my polite, unyielding finality. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly, but my heart felt lighter than it had in months. I had drawn a boundary. It was the first of many. The house sold quickly. As I packed up 50 years of my life, I found myself on a journey of rediscovery. I unearthed my old paintbrushes, their bristles stiff with age. I found a box of poetry books, their pages yellowed and soft. I found the girl on the beach, and I decided to let her out again. I bought a small sun-drenched condo with a balcony overlooking a park. I filled it not with heavy, dark furniture full of memories, but with light, comfortable pieces that I chose for myself. I set up an easel by the window and bought a new set of paints. My first attempts were clumsy, my hand unsure after so many years, but the simple act of mixing colors, of spreading them across a canvas, felt like a homecoming. One afternoon, while browsing in a second-hand bookstore downtown, a voice from the past called my name. Loretta? Loretta Mae Jenkins, is that you? I turned to see a man with kind, crinkling eyes and a head of silver hair that was still thick and wavy. It took me a moment, but then I saw the boy he used to be. Clarence Williams? I breathed, a smile spreading across my face, genuine and unforced. Clarence had been my first love, my high school sweetheart. We had talked of a future together before life, as it so often does, pulled us in different directions. He had moved away for college, I had met James, and our paths had diverged. He was a widower now, he told me, having moved back to town to be closer to his grandchildren. We stood there for an hour, surrounded by the quiet company of books, and talked. It was easy, comfortable. He didn't see me as Darnell's mother or James's widow. He saw me as Loretta, the girl who used to beat him at chess and had a laugh that he said he'd never forgotten. Clarence became my ally, my confidant, and slowly my joy. He encouraged my painting. He took me to concerts in the park. We went for long walks, our conversations meandering through the past and the present. He taught me how to dance again, right there in my new living room, his hand warm and steady in mine as we swayed to the sound of an old record. For the first time in my adult life, I felt seen as a woman, not just as a mother. I was rediscovering a part of myself I thought was gone forever. The weight in my chest began to dissolve, replaced by a fluttering warmth, a sense of hopeful anticipation for what each new day might bring. I was living, truly fully living. The universe has a strange sense of irony. It was on a beautiful autumn afternoon, as Clarence and I were returning from a drive in the country, laughing about some shared memory, that I saw him. Darnell. He was sitting on the bench outside my condo building, his shoulders slumped in a posture of utter defeat. He looked thin, pale, and years older than the last time I had seen him. The sight of him still sent a pang through my heart, a residual echo of that fierce, all-consuming maternal love. But it was different now. It was mingled with a sense of detachment, of self-preservation. Clarence squeezed my hand. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "No. This is something I have to do alone." I walked towards my son, my step steady. He looked up as I approached, and his eyes were hollow, haunted. There was no trace of the arrogant, dismissive man who had walked out of my life. This was a broken boy. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't rush to him, didn't throw my arms around him. I simply stood before him and waited. He was the one who had left. He had to be the one to find his way back. He stumbled through the story, the words tumbling out in a torrent of shame and regret. Keisha had left him. It turned out their entire life, the house he was so proud of buying on their own, was a lie. She had been draining their joint accounts for months, funneling money into a secret account of her own. The final betrayal had been discovering she was having an affair, that she had been planning her exit all along. She had taken the house, the savings, his pride. She had left him with nothing but a mountain of debt and a heart full of broken pieces. She said I was weak, he choked out, his face buried in his hands. She said she couldn't respect a man who still needed his mother to tell him what to do. She used you, Mom. She used your love for me as a weapon against me, against us. He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with tears. She was right about one thing. I was weak. I let her turn me against the only person who has ever truly loved me. I was a fool, Mom. And I am so sorry. I listened to his confession, my heart aching with a complex mix of emotions. There was pity for his pain, a lingering anger for the hurt he had caused, but overwhelmingly, there was a sense of sad clarity. He had needed to be broken like this. He had needed to have his world dismantled by the very person he had chosen over me to finally understand the difference between conditional, manipulative control and unconditional, supportive love. The old Loretta would have swept him up, taken him in, and immediately started fixing his life. She would have paid his debts, found him a lawyer, and fought his battles for him, all to soothe her own need to be needed. But I was not the old Loretta anymore. I sat down on the bench next to him, leaving a small, deliberate space between us. "I hear you, Darnell," I said, my voice gentle but not pitying. "And I am sorry for the pain you are in." I did not say, "I told you so." I did not list my own grievances. My validation did not require his ruin. My victory was not in his defeat, but in my own survival. His betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but it had also inadvertently set me free. It had forced me to build a life of my own, a life I now cherished. I could love my son again, but I could not lose myself in that love ever again. "You can't stay with me, Darnell," I said softly, and I saw the flicker of shock and hurt in his eyes. It was the first time in his life I had ever told him no. "Not because I don't love you, but because you need to do this yourself. You need to learn how to stand on your own. You can start by finding a small apartment, getting a job, any job, and taking responsibility for your own life, one day at a time." I reached into my purse and took out a piece of paper. On it was the number for a credit counselor and a therapist I had looked up earlier that week, just in case. It was a mother's habit I couldn't quite break. "These people can help you. I will be here to talk. I will be here to have dinner with on Sundays. I will always be your mother. But I will not be your safety net anymore. You have to learn to be your own." It was the hardest thing I had ever done, and the most necessary. He took the paper, his hand shaking. He looked from the paper to my face, and for the first time I think he truly saw me. Not as an extension of himself, not as a resource to be tapped, but as a separate person with her own life, her own strength, and her own limits. He nodded, a slow, dawning understanding in his eyes. He stood up, and for a moment I thought he would just walk away. But instead he leaned down and kissed my cheek. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. "I love you." "I love you too, son," I replied. And as I watched him walk away, his shoulders were still slumped, but his step seemed a little less heavy, a little more determined. He was not walking into the void. He was walking towards his own life. The months that followed were a delicate dance of rebuilding. Darnell did exactly as I had suggested. He found a small furnished room for rent. He got a job at a local hardware store, work that was humbling and honest. He started seeing the therapist. Our Sunday dinners resumed, but the dynamic was entirely different. He would tell me about his week, the challenges of his job, the small victories of paying a bill on time, or cooking a decent meal for himself. He asked about my life, my painting, my time with Clarence. He listened, truly listened, with a newfound respect and curiosity. He was getting to know me, Loretta, not just Mom. And I was getting to know him, Darnell, the man, not just my son. Our love was no longer a tangled knot of dependence and obligation. It was becoming a clean, strong thread connecting two independent people. He never asked me for money, and I never offered. My support was emotional, a steady presence he knew he could count on for advice or a listening ear, but not for a rescue. He was learning the hard, essential lessons of resilience, lessons I had inadvertently shielded him from his entire life. And in the process he was earning his own self-respect, something no one, not me, not Keisha, could ever give him or take away. He was finally growing up. My life, in the meantime, was blossoming in ways I had never imagined possible. My relationship with Clarence deepened into a profound and loving partnership. We traveled, taking small trips to the coast, to the mountains. We filled my condo with laughter, music, and the easy companionship of two people who had found a second chance at happiness late in life. My painting became more than a hobby. A local gallery owner saw my work at a community art fair and offered me a small exhibition. Seeing my canvases on the wall, my name on a small white card, filled me with a sense of accomplishment that was wholly my own. I had created something beautiful not out of a need to provide or sacrifice, but out of a simple desire to express the joy and color I had found back in my own soul. Darnell came to the opening of my exhibition. He brought me a single perfect rose. He walked through the gallery, looking at each painting with a quiet, thoughtful expression. He stopped in front of a painting of a windswept beach, the one inspired by that old photograph of the joyful, fearless girl I once was. "She looks happy," he said softly, his eyes on the canvas. "She is," I replied, coming to stand beside him. He turned to me, his eyes clear and full of a love that was no longer needy, but respectful. "I'm so proud of you, Mom." Those words, coming from him now, from this man who had fought his way back from the brink and was building a life on a foundation of his own strength and integrity, meant more to me than any amount of money or dutiful affection ever could. It was a love between equals. He never remarried, but he built a good life for himself. A life of quiet dignity, of purpose he found for himself. And I continued to live my own life to the fullest. Clarence and I were a team, partners in adventure, companions in the peaceful twilight of our lives. My relationship with my son was healed, but it was not restored to what it was. It was transformed into something better, healthier, and more honest. The betrayal that had shattered my world had, in the end, been the catalyst for us both to find our true selves. He had to lose my support to learn how to support himself. I had to lose his dependence to find my own independence. The silence that followed his cruel words all that time ago had been a void, but it was a void that I had learned to fill with color, with music, with laughter, with love, and with a life that was finally, completely my own. What would you do in this person's place? It is a question I have asked myself many times, and the answer is never simple. Every heart breaks in its own unique way, and every soul must find its own path to healing. I would love to read your opinions in the comments below. Let me know where you heard this story, what part of the world you are in, as we share this moment together. If this story touched your heart, please consider showing your support by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Your engagement helps me to continue sharing these experiences with all of you. For those who feel especially moved, the Super Thanks feature is a wonderful way to contribute directly to our storytelling community. There are many other stories waiting for you, each one a testament to the strength of the human spirit. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.